Fred van Blommestein van de Rijksuniversiteit Groningen, die ons een presentatie gaat geven over webforms. Fred, aan jou het woord.
Thanks. To start, I want to tell you also a little bit of my background. My background is not information technology even, it's logistics. I have been working for Stork, that's a machine factory in the Netherlands, for AkzoNobel and later for a consultancy company. But in the time I worked for AkzoNobel, I was involved in electronic data interchange. That was 20 years ago, and then EDIFACT was developed and standardized. And at that moment, I remember I was part of a few of those committees that were thinking about electronic messages. At that moment, we thought that, well, still 2 years, and then all logistic systems in the world will just talk to each other, and we don't need any forms anymore. And every computer has 2 buttons, a print button and a send EDI button. We are now 20 years further, and still, even with XML, this didn't happen. And that frustrated me a little bit. And I have been thinking the last 20 years how to improve that situation. And for that reason, I went to the University of Groningen to do some research on how to enable business systems to talk to each other in a more easy way. And that has to do with metadata and even with negotiation on metadata. And one of the spin-offs of this research was a thought that I worked out with a number of students, and that has become webforms. So let me summarize the problem. The problem is that in general, and not only within industrial or logistical companies, but in a lot of organizations, also governmental organizations, about 17% of the work people are doing is routine administrative work. That's all the bookkeepers are doing that. A lot of people do it then next to their normal job, and there's a lot of people who are keying in purchase orders or keying in invoices, this type of things, or anyway, things that probably will go, were coming from a computer, printed on paper, and are going in the computer again. And we made some calculations in some other projects. 50% of that work could be avoided if we would interconnect computer systems across organizations. Because, well, within an organization, most of that administrative work has already been automated, and the bottleneck is now across organizations, because this EDI trick didn't work, at least not for the big mass of interconnections between companies. If you calculate that a little bit, you get a yearly saving potential of 40 billion only for the Netherlands, and I have been proposing to the Ministry of Economics in the Netherlands to give me 1% of this amount to solve the problem. And they're still thinking about it. Why don't we interconnect computer systems? What is the problem? Why didn't it work with EDI or at the moment with XML? Well, how does it work? There are some standardization organizations, too many by the way, but they're still doing the job, that are designing messages, mostly XML messages, sometimes within a process context, sometimes together with web services, but there are a lot of those organizations, and they drop their XSDs to the companies that must use it. Now, it appears to be that in our economy, every business is a little bit different. And sometimes, for rightful reasons, they want to be different because they want to be on their competitive edge. But in most of the cases, they just want to change the XSD a little bit because their computer system is, for legacy reasons, a little bit different than the XSD was designed for. So they change it a bit. In a number of industries, that is done very little. They only make subsets, for instance. But for instance, in the transportation industry, it's well, it's the normal practice that each connection between two computer systems or two companies, even per message, is engineered individually. And that is too expensive to scale it up, of course, for all connections between, for instance, transport companies and their customers. So it just doesn't happen. They don't only customize the XSD or the message, but they also need to customize or even build the interfaces to their application systems, specifically for one customer or for one client or a subcontractor. And that must be at the same time. So the customer should customize or build its interface with this business information system, and the transportation company as well. And it's almost impossible to synchronize those projects, because when the transportation company is ready for opening its system by means of an EDI or an XML interface, then of course the client is just changing the version of their SAP system, or they just hired a new systems manager who has other ideas. So it's always difficult to synchronize those projects. And that's where the idea of EB forms came from. The consequence of this is that, as a rule, most business information systems are not connected with the business information systems of clients and of suppliers. So the idea of EB forms was to decouple the effort for building system interfaces by building a user interface instead, not for always, but for the temporary time that not both parties are ready to build their system interface. And to make a kind of XML browser that at least lets any company, small companies, big companies, any company, start with sending and receiving XML messages, so that each of the companies in their own time, when they are ready for it, when their application system is ready for it, can build the real interface with their system. But, of course, that tool, what would be needed to develop, should be very tolerant to the XML it could read or write. Because if we would need a different tool per message, then again we would have to do some development for each and every business partner, or even per business partner per message. And that would not be the idea. The idea would be to have no development to start with, and to do the development in their own time when the companies are ready for it. So it should be a generic tool that would be able to process any XML. And the ultimate goal is to get finally to an open B2B environment where every company, every organization would send XML messages to each other, and ultimately also read them in their systems, of course. Well, that was EB forms. EB forms is in the core, it's an XSLT script, and the XSLT script is such that it reads an XML instance. It goes to the XML schema of the instance, and it translates both of them to a screen form. And in fact, that's it. It's very generic, because if the instance changes, so if the instance, an instance comes in that belongs to another XML schema, it still works, and you still get a decent screen form. Now, you can imagine that if it's so very generic, that the screen forms are not very friendly. They can get any XML, so you can get a very cluttered screen while you want to have perhaps a screen in pages. You get columns, 2 columns where you would like to have 3 columns. The colors would not be nice to read, etc., etc. So what EBforms is also having is an extra XML file that is held locally, pure locally, so it has nothing to do with your business partner, that holds the look and feel of the form and the presentation of the form on the screen. And also that presentation is not dedicated for one schema. We look into the schema for the data types and the element types that are in the schema. We categorize those. We make use of the UNCFA core component standard to make a kind of hierarchy of semantics and syntactics of those elements. And when you get a new instance with a new schema that has more specialized data in it, then it inherits the presentation options of a former schema, what you already had presented on your screen. The XSLT is producing XHTML with Xforms, and so what is needed, and that's still a struggle we are in, and I hope at the end of my talk to have some discussion with you how to solve that. That needs a browser that does the proper XSLT transformation and has the proper Xforms interpretation. And that appears to be rather difficult to make that cross-platform and for all the small businesses that we